My name's Pope Reed. When I say IHCC, y'all are probably thinking I'm talking about International Harvester Collectors Club, otherwise you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Long before there was any collectors clubs, the IHCC was International Harvester Credit Corporation. Out of the 6 divisions of farm, truck, construction, parts, service, the credit corporation was the baby, least known, least talked about. I was a credit representative for the credit corporation when I first got out of school. I worked for the company from 1966, 67, it was really late part of 66, early 67, till 1973. I worked out of a small office in Richmond. There was a state office, and my territory covered probably a third of the state. It went north to Fredericksburg, Culpeper, south to Emporia, almost to the North Carolina line, west out to Stanton and to Lexington, close to where we are, and east down to the river, to the ocean and Norfolk Tidewater area. Today I'll talk to you a lot about the credit corporation, and I'm also had a lot of lessons learned, life lessons learned in my first real job out of college. So that will make it a little more interesting than what it could be with boring stuff on finance and what have you. My starting salary was somewhere around $7,000 to $8,000, believe it or not. But thinking of the times, gas was 25 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
My first house that I bought was $32,000. It was about 1,800 square feet. It was in a great neighborhood, especially for raising kids, cul-de-sacs, no through roads, 1-car garage, 1.5 baths. I sold the house in 7 years for $75,000, more than double my money. Bought 31 acres in Goochland County, built a house there for $150,000 that I'm still in today that's worth well over $1 million. So inflation was alive back then. The company car was a Travelall, of course.
Oh.
And Mr. Wilcox, who was the manager of the Richmond office, he got a new one about every year or two, and the old one got handed down to me or to the next lower person on the payroll. The one I had is actually featured in Red Power, the January issue. I'll leave it up here for you to look at later if you want. Then the peak of the past. It's a 1967 Travelall. Mine was two-tone, light green and white. Great vehicle, built on a pickup truck frame, basically, sort of like a body like a Suburban. Great for pulling, great for driving, and the greatest perk was you could use it for your personal use. That was a big benefit for working for the company. My wife and I had horses at the time, and I had a horse trailer. That was fabulous for pulling the horse trailer. The first couple of months that I was with the company, I was told by Mr. Wilcox, he was a crusty old dude, I have to tell you. Always had a cigar in his mouth, but he never smoked it. He chewed on it all day long. By the end of the day, I would say, best described as nasty. But he was a character, real character. I'll give you a little more about Mr. Wilcox later. He had told me to get a purchase order and go to Firestone or go to a tire store. We had a company branch on the boulevard in Richmond. They did all of the service work, anything you needed, but they did not carry tires, so you had to get a purchase order to get tires. And you could choose Goodrich or Goodyear or Firestone. Firestone happened to be the closest to where I live, so I chose Firestone, went to the Firestone store to get 4 new tires. I was sitting in the waiting room And the fellow that was working on the travelall came in to see me. He said, "Sir," he said, "is that vehicle, that travelall vehicle out there yours?" I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Let me tell you," he said, "that you've got bad brakes, you've got bad shocks, not so sure that you don't have bad tie rods. That vehicle is not safe for you to drive off the lot." And I said, "Come on, man." He said, "No, I'm telling you, you cannot drive it." I said, "Well, it's a company car, and I'm here for tires, and that's all I got a purchase order for." But I went, young and rookie, I went straight to the branch. Got the service manager, said, "Just up at Firestone, they tell me this car is in terrible shape and it needs all these things." Service manager laughed. He said, "Well, I'm going to put it on the rack and pull it in the shop, put it on the rack, and we'll take a look at it." So sure enough, we did. I walked out there with him. Mechanic got out there. They looked under the travelall, looked all over it, and he said, "There's nothing wrong with this travelall." I said to him, "Service manager," I said, "what in the world just happened here?" He said, "All those guys are on commission. They're going to get paid a commission for selling you something whether you need it or not." Well, needless to say, I was irate over that. Well, the old saying is, screw me once, shame on you, screw me twice, shame on me. Fast forward 7 years, I was with another company right after I left International, and the company car there was a Ford. So the boss, the president of the company, had a brand new Ford station wagon with Firestone tires. Well, some of y'all may remember back in the 70s, Firestone tires, they had a real problem with radials separating. This car had less than 100 miles on it, and the tires had separated. So the boss said, "Take this car up to Firestone." Different Firestone store, also on Broad Street. Both of these stores owned by the company, not dealerships. They were company-owned stores. And get the new tires. Went to the store and they said, "Yep, pull it on in." And said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to prorate these tires." I said, "You're going to do what? Prorate the tires? There's less than 100 miles on this car. It still has the new smell." Yep, that's company policy with prorate. That was the second time I'd been screwed. Lesson learned, take care of your customer. I have never, ever bought a set of Firestone tires since. And if I bought a new car, I'd tell the dealer when it comes in from the factory, if it's got Firestone tires on it, you will take them off and put on some more tires. And it reminded me of my famous quote, my favorite quote really, was Benjamin Franklin. He said, "We're all born ignorant, so you have to work really, really hard to become stupid." So I thought, what executive in Firestone decided that the best way to make money was to screw your customer, cheat your customer? You'll never have repeat business. You're looking to build relationships here, take care of your customer. A lot easier to go out to keep a customer than have to go out and find a new customer, because you're usually taking a new customer away from somebody else that's done that customer wrong. So to me, that was just the dumbest of the dumb, but a lesson learned. The structure of the International Harvester Credit Corporation was basically made up of 4 departments, so not departments, but 4 segments that were part of my job. The first was something called floor planning. Second was retail financing. Then there were, of course, collections, because there were some people that get late on their payments. And then in the last resort, there were repossessions. If you go down the street today and you look at a car dealership, or you go by a farm dealership and you see all this brand new equipment on the yard, and you say, well, how in the world do they afford to have all that inventory? Well, the deal is they don't. The dealer is working something called a floor plan. The floor plan is financing through the credit corporation. And they will set up zero financing for dealers dependent for a certain period of time. And it would be a short of maybe 6 months for tractors, maybe 9 months for combines, being that the combine was used at the end of the process of farming as opposed to the beginning areas of farming. And then if you still had the equipment after a certain period of time, some interest would start to accrue. And then if it went on further and you hadn't sold the equipment, then the interest rate would increase. But my main job was to call on the dealer and take inventory. The first of the week I would have delivered a schedule, and I would then choose the dealers that I was going to call on for the next week, and the corporate would send me a list of all the inventory that was on those dealers' lots for that week. And as I traveled that week, we would check off all of the equipment. And if the equipment wasn't there for 2 or 3 consecutive times out, it may well be out on demonstration. A lot of times the dealer would tell you, it's out on demonstration. Well, if you had checked that thing off and it wasn't there 2 or 3 times in a row after you taken inventory, then we'd say, well, take me on out to the farm and let me talk to the farmer and get the serial number off that machine just to be sure that it really was on demonstration. And if it was, then maybe it was time for the dealer to close the deal and get it sold as opposed to leaving it out on demonstration for that length of time. Cyrus McCormick was ahead of his time. He realized when he developed the reaper that in order for a farmer to be able to afford to buy the reaper, he had to have the money to buy the reaper, and he couldn't have the money to buy the reaper until he got a crop in with the reaper. So he was financing reapers long before anybody else even thought about doing financing. So he actually started this trend. And as it came up with many, many names today, the dealers I'm talking about, you'll talk about Ford Motor Credit or GMAC for General Motors. They were all right in line with International Harvester Credit Corporation, but Cyrus McCormick was the first to say you need to finance it and have the man use it in order to be able to make enough money to be able to afford to buy the machine. The retail financing had many, many plans. And when I traveled around, I would talk to the dealers, and every dealer had one of these books. It was a payment plan book for you to calculate rates. They also sold physical damage insurance if you wanted it, credit life insurance if you wanted it. And there were inserts that were in the book, and they all had different plans that the company had that would tailor fit to your special needs. There was, for instance, a skip payment plan. Skip payment plan might be if you're a farmer or if you're a dump truck operator or something where your business was slow in the wintertime, you could skip 3 payments if in the 12-month period you had previously already made 4 payments. So you could skip those non-seasonal. Then there was another plan called a 60-40 plan. 60-40 plan had you pay 60% of the payment schedule in the first half of the contract, 40% in the second half of the contract. And the reasoning being that during the early parts you had equipment under warranty. In the latter parts you're probably going to have to do some service and maintenance on that equipment. Therefore you would have lower payments while you in the last half of the schedule in order to be able to afford to do the maintenance and repair work or whatever you need to do on the equipment. And then there was the favorite, and that's the 0% financing. And that, by the way, this book is going to be in the auction tonight. I don't think there are very many nerds that would have a payment book that's complete from 1966 with these rates in. So I'm hoping that's going to be a hot item tonight at the auction. So get out your checkbooks, guys. We need the money. It goes to a good cause. There's a big construction company in Richmond, outside of Richmond in Goochland County, and it's F.G. Pruitt. The Pruitt family started out, it's a fourth generation family now operating this company, but they started out in the sawmill business with old F.G. Pruitt way over 100 years ago. And in the old days, a good sawmill operator would be able to cruise a piece of timber, come on in guys, cruise a piece of timber and realize that he could buy the whole farm for what the timber was worth. So instead of just buying the timber and moving on, they would buy the whole farm. They'd cut the timber, they'd still have the farm. They'd replant the timber, or they would farm it or sell it or what have you, but they had lots and lots of land. In the 1930s, I asked Jack Pruitt, who was second generation, a good friend of mine. He had Caterpillar equipment. And in his collection, International Harvester collection, he had all international construction equipment. And I said, how did that happen? How did that come about? He said, well, back in the 1930s, the federal government put into place the first minimum wage. And he said, Daddy said he didn't have a single man in the sawmill that was worth the minimum wage. He was shutting it down. Unintended consequences of the federal government trying to set minimum wages for industries that they know nothing about. So he decided he was going into the construction business, building roads, starting a little later to put in water and sewer. His problem was he was land poor. It was in the middle of the Depression. He had tons and tons of land, but he had no money. International was 0% finance. Caterpillar didn't have it. They may have had a better machine, but they didn't have 0% financing. So they bought all international equipment, had the benefit of being able to use it, and eventually have payments start, but at least they were making money in a time of depression, able to pay their men and their operators. Today, that is one of the largest construction companies. They're still building roads, sewer, but they have two divisions. Fourth generation is running the construction company, and the other division is a development division, building office buildings, developing land, shopping centers, all started with a ton of land that they owned from the grandfather or great-grandfather, who was smart enough to figure buy the land and the timber and keep the land. And today the family farm still is right outside of Richmond. It's probably about 15 acres. The original farmhouse still lived in by one of the members of the family, with the barns and everything, and a huge shopping mall and office buildings all around it. But it'll never get that farm as long as there's a Pruitt that's alive that will be utilizing that, staying on that property. So it's a testament as to how you build a good business and things that happen. But the key to all of it was International Harvester with 0% financing. The hook, if you want to say, for 0% financing was the rates. The rates were pretty darn steep. It's sort of like credit cards today. And you don't see much of it today when times are tough, but not too many years back, you had a lot of advertisements from credit card companies, 0%. consolidate all your loans. We'll pay off your credit cards with us, and we'll consolidate your loans at 0% for 6 months or what have you. Well, what was the hook? The hook was the interest rates better be able to pay it off. If you didn't pay it off when it came due, the interest rate was sky high. Well, Harvester's rates were a little high too. For a long time, you couldn't disclose, they didn't disclose what the rates even were. But in 1969, the federal government passed something called Truth in Lending. And they were required after that to disclose exactly what the true interest rate was. So that was another case where I would go around and open up the little book, throw away the inserts, put the new inserts in that had the truth in lending and all what the rates were at that time. So as far as the customer was concerned, the free interest was a sales tool. So you sit here again, and as we did with floor planning, and say, well, how do you have a credit corporation giving free interest? Well, they didn't give free interest. It was basically subsidized by the sales department, the farm equipment sales department, or whatever the other divisions. What do you do in December when your new models are coming out? You've got the current models still in inventory. And if you're a farmer, you're not going to be able to use that equipment maybe till, in a case for combine, you might use it in the summer if you've already planted winter wheat, but otherwise it'll be September. So instead of discounting the price, they would try to sell you 0% financing so that you would be, here again, generating a crop in order to be able to raise the money to pay for the equipment. Well, the other thing that happened, what happens in, say, March and April with a farmer? He's getting ready to plant. Now, if he's working from paycheck to paycheck, so to speak, or crop to crop, he's got a relationship probably with his local banker. So when it's time to buy seed and fertilizer, he's going to his local banker to get a loan to get his seed and fertilizer. Come June or come next September, when that tractor or that combine payment starts, he may have already maxed out with his credit limit with the local bank. So the key was then Harvester was betting on a certain percentage. These people are going to say, oh, I'll just go ahead and start making payments on my tractor with the International Credit Corporation. I can't get a loan at the bank. And that was the hook, so to speak. But it worked. There were plenty of them that kept doing it. The downside maybe to that was I got a call one morning from Mr. Wilcox. He said, cancel everything you've got for the week. Meet me down in Wakefield, Virginia. Got down to Wakefield, Virginia. Biggest farm dealer I had. And the whole facility was buzzing with International Harvester people. Even Fred Slaughter, who was the regional manager at the time in Charlotte, was there. Big deal. Turns out the dealer was going bad, and they were shutting it down. And it all worked around the scheme with zero financing. What the dealer did was he would sell the zero financing plan. He would order the payment books, and the payment books would come with a payment card that was the old style early computer cards with that were punch cards, and envelopes. So what you would do is you would put your check in there with the envelope already addressed, along with the punch card. It went to Atlanta to a special processing center. All it did was process payments. He would order the book to be sent to him. So what he would say is, I'm going to take the book out to the customer, in hopes that maybe I can talk to him about another sale, another piece of equipment he may want. Sure enough, that happened. Well, the dealer was also on the board of the local bank, small little community bank. So right before the payment would start, the zero interest was up, payment would start, he'd go to the farmer and say, the rate on this is pretty high with International. I can get you a better deal at the bank. Sure enough, he'd do that, go get the piece of equipment financed at the bank. He'd have the bank then send him the check for the payment to send to International Harvester Credit Corporation. But he never sent the check. He started making payments with the coupon books, kept the money. Well, what do you expect happened is, Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story is his bookkeeper got sick and went in the hospital. So payments did not get made. And irate customers started calling Charlotte saying, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. I don't owe you anything. I refinanced that tractor with the bank. And sure enough, bingo, the gig was up. And they were there to shut him down. For the next week, we were moving all kinds of equipment elsewhere to other dealers or wherever we could find a home for them. Parts department was packing up and sending parts back to the parts warehouse. And I'll never forget another lesson learned. I said to Fred Slaughter, the big general manager from the whole region, I said, that was my biggest dealer. And I cannot believe of all my dealers that he would be the one that would go bad on us. And Fred Slaughter said to me, Pope, you don't know what you would do if your back was against the wall. And I said, oh yes I do. I know I wouldn't steal, because my reputation, losing it was like losing my name. And that's something I would never do. And I've kept that as a lesson for all these years. And when I look back on it, I thought, well, maybe I should have known. He had second home in Virginia Beach, big boat, fancy cars. He clearly was living beyond his means for even the biggest of our tractor dealers in the region. So another lesson learned. The next area that we dealt with was collections. Not my favorite thing to do, but necessary. Wilcox, on the other hand, he loved collections. That was like a game to him. And he was tough as nails. The first month that I was with the company, he took off and traveled with me to show me the territory, meet the dealers, see the job and how it worked and the whole 9 yards. So one day we were going to collect some money, and this fellow, he had a tale to be told on why he couldn't make his payment and this and that. And all of a sudden, Wilcox just started bawling out laughing. He thought he was just laughing, and he was beside himself. And I looked at the customer, and he looked at me like, this man's lost his mind. And then he explained. He said, I've been working with this company for 30 years. And I thought I had heard every story there was to be told, and you just gave me a new one. I didn't think it was that funny. And like I said, my whole philosophy basically was, we don't want the machine back. The man needs the machine to work. He can't make money if he doesn't have the machine. And the repossession is the last thing in the world we want. So work with the customer. Keep him happy. He'll be a future customer if you make him happy and you work with him. And along the way, I made lots of good friends, and ones that stayed with me many years after I worked for the company. The house I'm in, the farm I'm in now, is a mile from a fellow named Taylor. Old Mr. Taylor was a farmer, and he'd get behind, and I'd have to go see him some, talk to him about his payments and work with him. He had two sons. One's George, and the other one was Bobby. Well, when I bought my place and then some years later, 5 years later, decided to build a house. First thing I built was a barn, because I told you I had horses. Well, George, right up the road, had wonderful hay, but he had trouble getting help. So he said, Pope, if you'll help me bale the hay, we'll leave it right on the hay wagon, hook it to your pickup truck, and you haul it home. I'll loan you my elevator so you can load it into your barn loft. Saves me from taking it to my barn, unloading it off the hay wagon, and reloading it back on another trailer just to bring it to you a mile down the road. And I'll give you a good deal on it. And he did. He was a friend for life until he passed away. His brother Bobby had international bulldozers and all international equipment, building ponds and roads. When I got ready to build my house, he put the road in for my house. He dug the basement for my house. Lifelong friends. So you never know what you might run into if you treat people the way you expect to be treated yourself. And one day, Mr. Wilcox gave me a bad check. And he said, we've had this check returned by the bank several times. I want you to collect it. We're tired of paying the fees. Well, the bank the check was drawn on happened to be right on my beaten path. I went by a branch of that bank all the time, small bank. So for a month, or a little more than a month, I would go in there once or twice a week. Teller would say, no, check's still not good. One day I walked in there and she looked at me really funny and she said, you are really close today. She felt sorry for me and she indicated that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of less than $10, that check would be good. I pulled a $10 bill out of my wallet, handed it to the teller, said, I'd like to make a deposit in this man's account, and then I want a cashier's check from this bad check. Bingo, collection made. Next month, Mr. Wilcox calls me into his office. And he says, I'd like to know what this miscellaneous collection charge of $12 is doing on your expense account. I told him what I had done. I said, it's $10 I made for a deposit and $2 for the cashier's check. And I figured my time going there wasted trying to collect this was worth more than that. He thought that was brilliant. He couldn't wait till the next manager's meeting to tell the story and say, here's an example of thinking outside the box. The customer, however, he was livid. Because guess what happened? So happens, he had a deal going, a scheme going. His truck payment was the largest payment he had. So he never had quite enough in there to ever make the truck payment. He's on the road all the time, so he figured I'd never catch him. The minute I got the check cashed with my extra $10, and I think the balance really was something like $8, all the other checks he had bounced. He was livid. He was about to take me down, but he never missed another payment. So I guess that was a good part of the story. So, the next thing that I need to talk about some is repossessions. That really was hopefully and actually not a very often occurrence. And as far as the credit corporation was concerned, it was the dealer's problem. Basically, we didn't have rollbacks or equipment to move a big piece of equipment on a repossession. So the dealer had to do that part, but there were times that we had to go along as a representative of the credit corporation just to make sure everything went well and the customer understood what we were doing. So early on in my career, I was down in Norfolk, and when I was in Norfolk, I always spent the night because I had a big truck store there, and a couple of farm equipment dealers, so it was a 2-day deal. Well, Mr. Harlow, who was in charge of the truck store, about 5 o'clock one night, he said, you spend the night, right? And I said, yeah. He said, can you do me a favor? He said, we've been looking for a truck to repossess for months, and I just got a tip that it's out at the truck stop on Military Highway, and the man's in there with a bunch of his buddies eating dinner. Can you take my mechanic out there to pick the truck up and bring it back? Just give him a ride out there. I said, sure. A little side story for a little tip that y'all may not be aware of here. You know, when you go to get a key made, the first thing the person that's going to make the key does is look for the right blank. And it all depends on the grooves on the side of the blank, and he'll pick the right one, and then he cuts your key. Well, in the old days with International, there were 4 blanks that would work for every tractor, truck, or whatever vehicle that had an ignition switch and needed a key. Well, there was a certain way you could cut those 4 keys. Sort of like the old days, if you remember the old, when we were kids, the old master lock keys, the cheapy ones that had all the teeth that were on this side. You could file off the teeth over here and just leave the front tip piece, and it would be a master key for all those old cheapy master locks. Well, every mechanic or every person that needed to move a piece of equipment had these 4 keys, because he didn't want to go to the office to find the customer's key or a key of one of the new vehicles just to move something around on the lot or to pull it into the shop. So they all had these 4 keys, and one of those 4 keys would work every piece of equipment that International had that had a ignition switch. So the mechanic had a key to the truck. When we get to the truck stop, he says, give me about 5 to 10 minutes, get it started and get it off onto the road and off this lot. And then you need to go in there and find Mr. Jones. Tell Mr. Jones that we've repossessed his truck so he doesn't think it's stolen, call the police. I'm a young rookie. I said, okay, no problem. So I go in to the truck stop and I find a waitress and I say, you know Mr. Jones? Oh yeah. He's in that back corner over there in that booth with those 5 guys. He's the one back against the wall. So I go back to Mr. Jones and I said, Mr. Jones, I'm Pope Reed with the Credit Corporation. I just want to let you know we've repossessed your truck. Well, some of you older folks here may remember in the 1960s there was a song. Baby, you've got the roller skates, I've got the key, you want to go roller skating with me? I said to Mr. Jones, just want to let you know we repossessed your truck so that you don't think that it's stolen and call the police. He said, like hell you have. He said, I got the key in my pocket and you're not man enough to take it from me. I said, you may have the key, but I got the roller skates. Big mistake. Oh, smart ass. I learned another lesson because he had 2 buddies holding him down. Otherwise, he would have been over that table and taken my head right off my shoulder. So, another story, a farmer named Fritz Keck lived way up in Goochland. To tell you, we repossessed his Farm All-In tractor, took it to Richmond on a Friday. On Sunday morning, Fritz brings his 12-year-old son to the dealership to pick up his tractor, and that boy rode 40 miles back to his farm. We thought he was crazy. Today with this group, you'd say that's one hell of a tractor ride. But that's how bad Fritz needed his tractor. But many years later, another one of those collection stories, my wife told me she'd found a new man to provide some shavings to put in the horse stall for the barn. And who in the world drives up but Fritz Keck? He'd lost his equipment, he'd lost his farm, he was selling chips to horse people to put in the horse stall. So another connection, another person that a friendship made. Final chapter with International, you got to realize how different things are today than they were back then. The company loyalty back then was unbelievable. People many people worked with the same company all their lives, and the International was no exception. They would look forward to getting a 5-year pin, a 10-year pin, all the way up to maybe 50 years, and maybe a gold watch in 50 years and a pension. Today, that loyalty is not there. It's not there with the companies. It's not there with the employees. It just doesn't work anymore. But that's the way it was back then. One of the catches was you had to move if you wanted advancement. And in the 6-7 years I was there, I had 3 or 4 opportunities if I wanted to advance to move. Well, my family, my wife's family, they were all in Richmond. I really didn't want to move. So I had an unusual encounter of all places in a men's room. I was coming back from Emporia down near the North Carolina line on my way back to home late in the afternoon, dinner time. I stopped in a Holiday Inn below Petersburg to have dinner. And I hate to say it to this poor lady's the only lady in here, but I've observed over the years, men have, the ladies usually go to the ladies' room in pairs. They seem to stay an inordinate amount of time. And of course, we assume they're talking about us, and they probably are. But when men go, they go for the intended purpose of the men's room, and they do their business and they're out. So imagine my surprise when I'm in a very captive position to have the gentleman next to me start up a conversation. Well, it turns out he was a salesman with the farm division. He obviously must have seen my Travelall in the parking lot when I got out of it. And it was obvious because we had the factory-owned vehicles had a special license plate, said FD, and then the number. And the FD stood for factory dealer. So he must have known I worked for the company. He did too, so he said he was spending the night. He said, join me for dinner. I said, great, loved it. Had never met the man before. By the time we got to dessert, he told me he had been with the company for 25 years and proudly announced that he had moved with the company 21 times. Thinking back to Ben Franklin, I'm not sure where stupidity meets loyalty to a company, but I think I found it right then. I came home and told my wife that I was looking for another job the next day because I couldn't deal with that. When she got it, she was shocked, and it was not the best of timing because we had a 2-year-old and she was pregnant with a second child coming on the way. Not the best time to be looking for a new job. But I had great times with International Office of Credit Corporation, met lots of good people I still keep up with today, local people. So I thank you all. I didn't know if you have any questions that I can answer for you. Yes, sir.
Early in your discussion, you talked about the life insurance.
Yes.
And so did International have a division for?
They did. It was all part of this. They worked it out with some other company. But there was actually a schedule in here. If you go down through, you can take a look at this when you come back up if you want after. But there's one category here that is without life insurance, and these rates would apply for however many months and whatever the rate was at the time. The darker ones would be with life insurance or with the damage insurance. So you could get it either way, and it was all calculated and went right in with your payment. Yes, somebody else had a question. No. I'd like to know who came from the longest place. Somebody outside of Virginia, obviously. California. Is anybody here can claim that they came further than California? Don't think so. I got something for you. As a token for your travel to come this long way for our convention. It's an International Harvester Credit Corporation ruler. Every division had these that they gave out. Since we really didn't deal per se with customers, we were dealing with dealers all the time. Then not a lot of these got handed out. With each division, like with the farm division, over here would be all farm equipment, a combine, tractor, whatever. With truck division, same thing. It would be all different models of trucks. The Credit Corporation was the only one that had a truck, a tractor, and a bulldozer for all three divisions on those rulers. And these are pretty rare, I think. So, thanks for coming.
Thank you very
This
much.
long distance. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I was a field service rep for International for 40 years. I started off as an apprentice mechanic. When I went out in the field, I worked with the credit people, and that guy was with International about 3 years and got transferred 8 times.
Another person that was here yesterday who who actually owned a dealership in Richmond. When a dealership went bad in Richmond, a farm dealership, he was in corporate in Chicago, and he ended up moving to Richmond and buying that company, that operation as a dealership, and they helped him finance it. And he told me that he had moved 6 times before he came to Richmond. That was like the 7th in the time that he had been with International. So it was very common for you to pick up and move, but it wasn't for me. I mean, somebody that didn't care about it. But 21 times in 25 years, that was it just absolutely insane as far as I was concerned.
There was a lot of people come out of Chicago, took over dealerships. There was 3 or 4 in eastern Pennsylvania that did that. They wanted to get back home and these dealerships came.
Yeah.
The factory branches became available. They come in and took them over and ran them.
Yeah.
I guess that shortly after that, International got rid of all of their factory branches, and that turned them over to dealerships.
Yeah. Well, this gentleman said he'd never been to Virginia or knew anything about Virginia, but he knew he couldn't. He didn't want to stay in Chicago and try to look for a job there in a similar type of field. So he thought that would be a great way that if he didn't pan out, he'd find another job in Virginia. It'd probably easier than he could up in Chicago. So, but he's many years he had this dealership, and a nice one, farm equipment dealership, many years. Any other questions?
What did you do after you left Credit Corporation?
Totally different business and industry. I actually had another job lined up. I had a gentleman, I went in the title insurance business. I worked for the big corporations, Lawyers Title, and a company called Southern Title that was a Virginia-based company. And then I went out on my own and started 2 agencies of my own to represent a bunch of them. Did almost all commercial work, big commercial projects and what have you. So totally different, not connected. Went back to collecting tractors when I retired from there and said, my wife said, you better find something you want to do because you're not hanging around the house when you retire. So I got into collecting tractors. My great uncle had a farm down outside of West Point when I was a boy. I went down there. He had a farm, all M, a C, and a B on the farm. Working farm, dairy farm, and I spent some really fun summers down there. So I started collecting red when I was getting ready. And we've got a show outside of Richmond that was actually on the Pruitt property I mentioned here called Field Day of the Past. It's a heritage show, great show. We preserve old equipment and show the kids how to run it from steam to anything that's about to be destroyed. Give you a quick example. We've got a machine that takes a log 4 feet long, and doesn't matter how big around it is, all driven with line shafts. Comes down and it cuts off a thin veneer out of the log. You take the bark off and then it spins, and as it comes off, it's a thin sheet just like it goes into a sheet of plywood. It comes off in these huge sheets 4 feet wide. We then take it to another machine that stamps out a wooden spoon like the ones you used to get with a Dixie cup and ice cream. And then it goes into a big tumbler. It's made with 2 wagon wheels and looks like something they use in the lottery to spin the numbers, that dries it and smooths out the spoons. So the kids get to see a log over here and they walk home with a wooden spoon over here, that type of thing. And I got involved in that. And then my wife said, now you're so involved in that with tractors and farm all tractors and that field day. Every September I'm tied up for at least a month getting ready for the show and putting it all away. She always said, the month of September, she's a field day widow. She never saw much of me. So I went from one extreme to the other. And then she would want to know how many tractors I had, and I'd say not enough, and she'd laugh because she never came down to the bottom to the barn where I had them, but I had about 35. She didn't really want to know. She just wanted to sort of pull my chain. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming, and I appreciate y'all being here and hearing my presentation.
Thank you.